And do you think this is base reality or a simulation?
That's a tricky one. I rather like the simulation argument. I think that the impossibility of determining empirically whether you're in a simulation, and the fact that simulations can be iterative, right? That a simulated universe can have, individuals who create their own simulated universe and so on. That leads to the rather attractive conclusion that we're very unlikely to be not a simulation. But there are ways out of that argument.
And do you think that we live in a simulation?
So this is actually a very old idea. Many of you probably know René Descartes was one who asked this question. He said, how do I know that I'm not just a brain in a vat being stimulated by scientists to feel like I'm sitting in a chair and I'm having a conversation and so on. And his conclusion was that you can't really know that. And so he made a very important step in philosophy where he said, je pense donc je suis. I think, therefore I am. And what he meant is, there's somebody asking this question. There's somebody asking this question of, am I a brain in a vat? And so I exist, whether I'm a brain in a vat or I'm me or whatever. There's some me that's there. So that was an important step. But the question of whether a simulation, that was sort of, I would say that was sort of buried in philosophy departments for a while. But now, just now, especially in Silicon Valley, that's becoming a really interesting question because we can build simulations that are so detailed and terrific. So it seems, of course, totally plausible that a future civilization is building a simulation where you seem like you're in this very beautiful room and you're talking with people and it wouldn't even be that hard to simulate this, especially if there's nothing going on outside. Like, in other words, your house is not being simulated right now. None of the details. But as soon as you stepped outside, then the street gets stimulated again and so on.
None of the Earth is rendered. Only the area of the Earth that you are in is rendered.
Exactly. And that was one of my stories in some, actually, is that only the rendering happens where you're seeing it. Yep. But the point is you could run that almost on a cell phone. And so that's why this idea has been taken more and more seriously as a possibility. Now, the question is, how would we ever get it out of the realm of a philosophical question into a scientific one? We don't know the answer to that yet, unless there's a particular sign, like one of the transistors in the simulation burns out and suddenly, all the plants disappear or something. And
do you think that this is a simulation?
I guess I saw that from the topic. Oh my gosh. I don't think this is a simulation.
Why?
I don't. Because it's a good question. Because I haven't seen, I know there was this argument that it is a simulation. Here's the data, but I just feel like
you are a numbers man.
I am a numbers man, and it is a possibility. I would not dismiss the possibility it's a simulation. At a hand, I would not. And I also am. There are times when it does feel like you're walking in steps that have been laid out in front of you in the sand. I mean, there's sometimes that sense, but I still believe it's us, and we're doing it, and we're choosing it, and we're making it happen.
Do you believe in free will?
Yeah, I do believe in free will to a point. I do think it's not that that many of the virtues that we praise in people, it's that's just because certainly to the extent I'm capable of anything, there are a lot of things that went into it in terms of my parentage, and so even the things where I think I'm choosing, there are probably a lot of things that were just my wiring, or the fact that my
reality.
Now, do you think that, the last couple questions, do you think this is base reality, or do you think that this is already a simulation?
Well, that's a good question. Now, as you know, there's this guy, Nick Bostrom, in the philosophy department in Oxford University in the UK. And, he says there's a 20% chance that we're not having this conversation. We're just computer code running in some future computer. And I asked him where he got that 20% number. He wasn't very clear on the answer to that, but I also asked him, how could I tell? And he said, well, just look for errors. Alan suddenly disappears out of the chair. You don't expect that. If he does that, then I can say, he wasn't real. This is just a simulation. It's like Sim Earth. This is Sim Alan, right? The only trouble is that anybody who saw The Matrix knows if there are mistakes in the code, all they do is they back up the program, fix the error, and then run it again. And so I never see you just disappear. So I don't think we're a simulation personally, but maybe I'm such a good simulation that I can't fathom the possibility that none of this is real.
Back on the alone question is if you guys think we're in a simulation.
Is that why it's called? I was wondering.
One of
We're in the
reasons.
Matrix. I believe it.
I want to unpack that more.
No, I was kidding. I don't even want to make a comment on that, honestly.
That's a good answer. Anybody that says that, that's an educated answer right there. No comment.
I choose to think this is the real world.
We're here to learn something. We're here to grow, and we may be here multiple times. This may not be the only. Call it, if this were a video game or a simulation. I don't believe this is a simulation or a game. It is a game, just not a video game. It's the great game.
It's the great game.
The game of life.
There's a lot to learn. There's a lot to level up.
Yeah, but it's about that. It's about leveling up and identifying the loops or the traps and the mistakes that you're repeating, so that you can kind of break the chain.
Interesting.
And continue to evolve, to continue to become more enlightened, more awakened, more aware, more conscious.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's like synchronicities. I call them, people are like, there are no such thing as coincidence. I call synchronicities coin incidences. Look at the spelling. It's like Mario. The universe is giving you synchronicities are coins being basically put before you.
Yeah. And then you already gave us the answer. You don't think we're in a simulation. That's our second question.
I believe it's real. I mean, it's more than that. I mean, you could call it that, but I think that is. It's much more real than that.
It's the great game, as you said, the great game.
But the universe is much more complicated than we're all. I mean, I know very little.
And piggybacking on that, do you think that this is a simulation?
I have no idea, man. But it's okay if it is. But I have no idea. I am very comfortable if it is. I'm very comfortable if that is what's taking place. There's one thing that I don't have any desire to being. Zero. And I think that's the problem sometimes. There are a lot of people that want to be God. I have zero desire to be God. And let me explain what that means to me. I want to know, I'm curious, I want to learn a lot. But I don't want to be God, because if I aspire to want to be, like some religions sell you on, if you move up these points and you become a 23, you become your own God, and one day when you die, you have your own universe. You would never convince me to get baptized in that religion. So I don't aspire to want to be God. I don't care to be God. I don't want to be God. So if that is happening, I am very okay playing that role. And I'm going to do my best to be a good character in that movie. Let's just say that is taking place. But for me, it's more about controlled decision-making process that increases my odds of putting myself in the right position to make impact.
Do you think we're in a simulation?
Good question. I hope not, because otherwise everything that we just went through and everything that I was working through over the past years would be something that someone made me think of, and maybe a solution to a problem. But if it's a solution to the problem, which would mean that other people who are part of the simulation are going to be happier and healthier, then I'm fine with that solution, as long as the science and the evidence wins.
Jordan, are we in a computer simulation?
If we are, it's within a computer that we don't understand. Questions like that are strange, because it's like asking whether you can reduce consciousness to its material substrate, and the answer to that is yes. But by the time we reduce consciousness to its material substrate, our understanding of what that material substrate is will have transformed so dramatically that it won't look very much like the material substrate that we presume now. And so if we're in a simulation, then it's within the confines of a mechanism that we can't easily assimilate to our own computational devices. So and then, of course, the other problem with a question like that is, well, we've already defined this as reality, and so is reality a simulation? It's, well, no, by definition, it's not. You might say, well, a simulation can get so real that you can't distinguish it from reality, but you start to... Almost all questions of the form, is A, B, devolve down to, it depends on how you define A and B. Because the problem with questions like that is it decontextualizes the terms, right? It's like, well, what do you mean by reality? What do you mean by simulation? Well, if you mean the same thing by both of them, then they're the same thing. If you mean different things by both of them, then they're different things. And so, well, but I'm serious. Yeah, I'm serious about that. You know, most of the time you can't pull single terms out of a conversational stream and assume that the term has a bounded definition that's self-evident using only that term. Because when we converse, it's like, well, you utter a stream of words. It's like, well, what do the words mean? Well, it depends on where they are in the phrase. It depends on where they are in the sentence. It depends on where the sentence is located in the paragraph. It depends on the context within which the paragraph is uttered. And you triangulate all of that simultaneously to extract out the meaning of the word. And then if you take a word out like it's a thing and another word out like it's a thing, and you say, are these two things the same? You're acting as if those words can be decontextualized and they have absolute meaning in their decontextualized state, and they don't. So usually those questions, I would say, in some sense, are philosophically untenable. So well, that's the answer to that
That's
question.
the answer to that. There's happened. Okay, how about, do you think we're in a computer simulation?
Again, the same question is, does it matter? I mean, things matter. You know, people seem to either experience pleasure or pain. I experience pleasure or pain. It feels real. So whether it's a computer simulation or not, who cares?
Beautiful. Awesome. Right here on our planet. But do you think that advanced civilizations have birthed into the cosmos and that they're roaming it, colonizing star systems, that kind of a thing?
No.
You think we're alone in the
I think we're alone. Probably. I don't see any, there's no evidence we aren't alone. And the idea that, in order to escape the idea that we're alone and thus unique, and thus, in some sense, a singularity, that we are the singularity, scientists entertain the ridiculous proposition of infinite multiple parallel universes. There's not a scintilla of evidence of multiple universes. It's just a kind of word game played by frustrated physicists who can't explain the uniqueness of the existing universe, and its amazing phenomena, including the human mind, which they can't even begin to fathom yet. They just explain it away. They say it's a machine, and that's exactly what it isn't.
And this into the very last thought, because you've addressed this before in your conversations, about being in a computer simulation. You actually said that it takes humans away, all of that abstract thought, it takes us away from the principle of truth, of seeking truth and having a higher, maybe God for us to...
Yeah, I mean, I really believe this idea that humans are all part of some simulation to be a clinical lunacy. I mean, it really is. People who say this and pretend to believe it are lunatics, and they may be geniuses in some fields, and some of them are, but it is really a ludicrous idea.
I'm loving this conversation. I know it could go on for another hour if we wanted. Okay, very last question is, are we in a computer simulation?
I think that reality, if you have to take 21st century kind of memes and analogies, I think that reality is physically like a neural network, okay? It has the architecture at the Planck scale of what we would call a topological, which means non-local, neural network, and we're not, that's not a novel thought. There are a lot of elite physicists saying exactly the same thing. although nobody has the convincing theory of what the specific architecture of this neural network is. So,
like a collective consciousness.
Well, just because it's a neural network doesn't mean that for sure a collective consciousness has to exist, but it means that you can suggest that it may exist without being laughed, right?
Okay.
Without it being with a straight face. So, computer. Okay, are you a computer? Yes, you are. What's 1 + 1? You just computed that.
Yes.
So you can compute, therefore you are a computer, a computer, right?
Yeah. Yes.
But are you a computer in the normal sense of the word? Not necessarily. Computers generally cannot invent questions and generally do not have free will. So what you are is far more than a computer. You can compute, but you can also generate novel and unpredictable questions and syntheses of things that is more akin to the neural network story where consciousness, remember we talked about how every materialist, most materialist skeptical physicist will say, I'm conscious and I think consciousness is real and I don't know how it works or what it really, how you define it.
And computers could get to the point where they could have these abstract thoughts and be able to...
Well, a lot of people say that that is probably, some people say that's not possible, but that it may be possible with a quantum computer.
Okay.
Because with a quantum computer, you have this non-predictability, because one of the underlying premises is that it's non-determinate, like it's not an algorithm playing out, that if you knew all the starting conditions in every detail, you could predict it. So you're unpredictable. Nobody can predict with absolute certainty what you're going to do. You're guided by a neural network and this consciousness. So I think that reality is a sort of mind-like neural network, but we don't have to anthropomorphize that and imagine a god of the collective consciousness with a white beard. It may be more like the Force in Star Wars or the flow of intelligent chi in Buddhism or something like that.
Yep.
But whatever it is, it's more analogous. Because, by the way, the Ouroboros story is logically self-consistent. Every part has a logical explanation. Boom. The computer simulation hypothesis says that we are an advanced quantum simulation in an alien geek's basement at his mother's house, right? And then it leads to the question, well, by that same logic, if we're statistically a simulation in the alien geek's basement, isn't he also a simulation in another universe? And it's called the turtles all the way down problem, which is it doesn't really give you much satisfying explanation. But the Ouroboros story, where everything is emergent and explained by everything else, including the alpha and omega, the beginning and end, is logically satisfying, and there are no logical deal killers in it.
And this piggybacks, this rides right into the question that we ask on the show a lot, which is, do you think we're in a simulation?
What difference does it make? Do I think we're in a simulation? Define a simulation. If you really define a simulation, absolutely we're in a simulation, right? So none of what you see is actually what you see. None of what you touch is actually what you touch. We don't touch anything. Do you realize that? You've never touched anything in your life. The molecular forces, how can you touch when really the mass in this skin, I'm sure you understand that, huh? So the entire mass in your body is probably a pin size, and the rest is space. The rest is electrons, orbiting the nuclei at a very large distance. And the reason why you can touch is because there is, force here and force there, and they just cannot interact, right? If I really look at you, it's actually quite interesting, huh?
I see you inside of myself.
Absolutely. So the reality is, you're not here. You're mostly empty space, but the photons hitting your head are just slightly smaller than the distances, slightly bigger, so they reflect. Right? So they reflect to my eye, they trigger an electrical signal that gets translated into my brain as, a wonderful, elegant shirt, right? But is that really a shirt? Is that really something? Does a cat see it the same way? Will the artificially intelligent machines see it the same way? Of course not. And so the reality is that this entire world we live in is just an electrical signal in your brain, which is not very different from Halo.
Yeah.
Just saying, right? But it doesn't have to be a video game. It doesn't have to be a simulation. It just operates suspiciously similar to a video game.
Hypothesis?
Yeah.
That's a really interesting one.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Okay, and then do you think we're already in a simulation?
I'm going to read a passage to answer that. Only because I don't have what I think is a good answer on the simulation hypothesis, like whether we're in a simulation right now. Like I think it can be argued either way. But one of the things that
you just argued for transition hypothesis.
Yeah,
so,
but listen to this. So Kevin Kelly talks about, he started Wired magazine, and he talks about a series of discontinuities that have changed how we see ourselves in the cosmos. The first one was when we thought we were the center of the universe, and then we realized we're just a little speck of dust in the sunbeam. And then another discontinuity has been the one that we think that we're like somehow special and the other animals are not, like we're gods and they're not. And then we realized evolution, no, we're the same, we're on a continuity. So the discontinuity was eliminated again. The third one that we're going through now is that we think ourselves as different from the man-made or the human-made. So there's the natural, the organic, and the human-made is somehow unnatural. Mm-hmm. But increasingly we realize that we're just smack in the middle between the born and the made, and that's another continuum. And the technium, which is the Kevin Kelly phrase for the organism that we call technology, he calls the seventh kingdom of life. So technology is, we realize, is just continuous with biological evolution. Mm-hmm. But then the last exceptionalism, and it goes into this idea of whether we're in a simulation or not, the fifth discontinuity is the special status that we give to the physical. We feel the universe to be a place full of physical material that pushes back and presses against us. Things have weight, size, and duration. That's what the universe is in everyday experience, the real stuff that can be measured, felt, and sensed. Our world of matter and energy follows a set of laws to such an exacting degree that we can manipulate it to make rockets and computers. That's pretty solid. Matter's consistent refusal to be bullied outside of its own laws adds to the sense of it being real, right? Real means physical, right? Information, on the other hand, lacks physicality. Mm-hmm. Unlike energy, which we can at least measure with physical instruments, a digital bit is disembodied. It weighs nothing. It takes up no space. We don't have good measures for information. We are not yet sure if the total amount of information in the universe is conserved, nor if it is finite. Yet we have come to see that life, even our own life, is a pattern of intangible information rather than material form. Evolution, that great engine of creation, is a pattern of information. And mind, especially the mind, is a type of information flow. So we know that the most powerful forces in the universe that we are aware of are constructed of the most intangible things we can detect, bits. There stands the discontinuity, atoms versus bits. But lately, physicists have begun to suspect that atoms themselves are composed of information in some way that we don't understand. As the legendary physicist John Wheeler puts it, its are bits. The deeper we inspect the interior of subatomic particles and their quirky behavior, the more they can be explained as information flows. Many physicists expect that when we get to the bottom of how matter works, we'll find primarily a structure of information and the absence of anything material. Atoms will be understood as elaborate, dynamic arrangements of intangible signals. Solid-state physicist David Mermin writes, matter acts, but there are no actors behind the actions. The verbs are verbing all by themselves, without a need to introduce nouns. Actions act upon other actions. There's no duality between the existence of a thing and its properties. Properties are all there is. Indeed, there are no things. As this discontinuity between the realm of the physical and the realm of the immaterial is erased, scientists have begun to re-envision the laws of physics as complex algorithms of code. Energy also is being restated in terms of information. The pulsating stars and iron planets will gradually be seen by science as wisps of intangible nothings. Organisms and technologies, including megastructures like skyscrapers and starships and floating cities, will be defined as structures of computation equivalent to software. So if that's the case, then yeah.
Going on there too.
I think I saw this on Rick and Morty.
Yeah. So what do you think about stuff like this? You see how there's that delay going on. Do you think we're in a computer simulation?
You know, this has come up for me quite a bit lately in San Francisco, talking with people about this, but I mean, it's just another label. Like in another language or culture, they'd say samsara, they'd say the illusion. Yes, we're in this, yes, this is real, and it's an illusion in the sense of it's not everything, it's not what we think it is. You know, even in quantum physics, which can be grossly, misquoted and misaligned, but they have this idea of the implicate and the explicate, and that there's an originating reality which is projecting this whole reality as a hologrammatic sort of projection from the originating reality. So, I mean, I think so many systems, so many religions, and so many paradigms basically all agree that we're a simulation. It's just that we've created a new label for the meme du jour, right? And we say it's a simulation. And it's like, it's a simulation. I would say, what's the purpose of the simulation? I mean, why do we incarnate, and why does it run an algorithm to create life, to then create more and more and more complexity, to then create more and more quest for meaning, until we get to some point where there's got to be a purpose to the simulation.
Up seeing how quadrillions of games played out, learning more about itself, going back to sleep, etc.
Yeah, I mean, just to touch on the word simulation. So again, this is not a simulation, it's an illusion. So something that's infinite cannot be simulated by a finite computer, no matter how powerful it is. So the finite and the infinite are fundamentally incongruent. They really are the same being, because there is no actual finite. It's the illusion of finite. But I could never have a finite computer that could calculate the infinite.
Unless
it's still be trying
infinite computer.
Then it would be there wouldn't be a computer, because it'd be infinite. It wouldn't be limited to being a computer.
This could be a computer.
How could it be? Because a computer is limited.
This could be an infinite computer.
That would be God.
Yes. Okay.
So you can call God an infinite computer, but that seems to flatten it somehow.
Infinite consciousness could be an infinite computer.
So this is how computation works, right? I'm knowing that a 1 is not a 0.
Well, that's how we think. And qubits are different. Plus, wherever goes
this
past
is a
that,
qubit. This is a qubit.
But even
so a qubit is knowing 1 and 0 at the same time. Well, it's not really.
But even past that as well, we don't know our little. We're trying to imagine the big game as crickets. It's very hard.
You can't imagine infinite consciousness. Not possible. You're already looking at it right now. You're staring right at it. You're staring at infinite consciousness right now. That apple is infinite consciousness. You're staring right at it.
There's nothing other than infinite consciousness, God. It's a singularity with no dimensions, a dimensionless singularity. Way up. Spending a lot of time in computation, I'm sure that you've used simulations before. The show's called Simulation. We love asking people about do you think this is a simulation?
That this is a simulation?
Yeah.
Let's see. I think probably not. But V.S. Ramachandran in the book Phantoms in the Brain, his last chapter argues that consciousness is nothing more or less than your model of what's out there. I think that's probably right. So this is not a simulation, but you are. Because my default mode network has said, Woody, you're separate than Alan, and you're not part of that flat file. and I have a model of what's out there, and when I die, that simulation is going to shut down. I think that's probably reasonable, because I can't know anything about you being there unless if I touch you and I get some feedback that haptic agreed with my model. The downside, given what we're discussing, is that if my default mode network over-constrains me to stay within my model, or stay to make sure that the model of what's out there is not too expensive, if it exercises confirmation bias for what I like to hear things that I already think I believe, then I may not get to learn as much. So yes, part of this is a simulation, and both of us need to learn how to modulate the degree to which we can test new things in that simulation. We can tweak the dials.
Yes. Is this a simulation?
Oh, is this a simulation? I'm going to say the probability, it's possible. The probability is low from what I understand of our basic physics. However, our experience of all of this is a simulation in the brain. So, I'm not going to say the physical things here are a simulation, but I think our perception of reality is a simulation. We're all running simulations sort of, or I don't know if that's what you mean by simulation, but I mean,
definitely.
And we're creating this reality in our mind, which doesn't necessarily correlate to the real reality. But I do think there is like a real physical world out there. We're just limited in our capacity to experience it because we're just experiencing it via these like little 3-pound pieces of matter. I mean, they're pretty complex and interesting, but we're limited. And we might be limited in ever knowing, what it all means, or because we're sitting here with these tiny little caveman brains trying to figure it out. But so yeah, we're kind of running a simulation in our own head. But I do think that this is really out there.
Okay. Tim, how about, are we in a simulation?
No. I don't think so. I think there are too many fun, interesting things where you can control them and make interesting new things happen. You can go mold your future. You can mold the service you're going to provide to people. You can do so many things with your life. Maybe there is some watcher.
Do you think that we are in a simulation?
I believe that we're in a metaphysical simulation of the mind created by our own thoughts, and that we're in a consensual reality. Are we in a computer program created by some God programmer? Probably not, but we're definitely in a metaphysical simulation of our own thoughts that we can reach right now because we don't know anything more.
So the perception that I see the world with, I'm locked into that, and then I'm making consensus with other people about that's a chair, that's a lamp, that's a blah, blah.
That's the simulation. I don't necessarily believe that it's a computer program, but I do believe that it contains data.
And that perception is limited to the senses that we have, right? To the muscle that we train that is our soul. So if we can train that better, we can unlock new perception.
Exactly. Yeah, I don't think it's impossible to get out of this simulation either. We are in the simulation of our own reality based on material, but we can transform our consciousness to new realms. We can go to new areas.
And emotions.
Not the only solution, but an important part.
It's an important part. Do you think we're in a simulation?
Ooh, I mean, I put a reasonably high probability on it, but so looking around at my life and looking around at the people I know and the amazing projects that I see happening and the people I get to meet, that almost kind of raises my estimation that we're in the simulation, because if you were creating a simulation and then dropping your intelligence into some random avatar that doesn't know that it's in a simulation, this is basically the life you would drop it into, right? Mm-hmm. So that's the bit I always find funny. So, but yeah, if we don't wipe ourselves out, I'm sure we'll do ancestor simulations.
So excited for the ancestor simulations. I think they'll give us the insight into how this is not base reality.
Oh, right, yeah. Turtles all the way down.
Yep. Are we in a simulation?
Well, you're like now pinching the most, the things that hurt the most. Well,
why does it hurt the most?
Because in one way it's like very disappointing. But like if it's just a simulation, I mean, it is a simulation because, I mean, we are, well, okay. So because you didn't clarify in which, like, what do you mean by simulation, I will say yes, and a simulation in a sense that every time we choose a path in our lives, and I believe that there is a portion of kind of, you know, like our choice, nothing is predetermined, or we would just kind of like be very depressed. So like there are different ways, and we already thought out the way that would lead us somewhere and hopefully made the logical decisions. So that simulation was already run, so we are today living in simulation. Every second I'm living in a simulation that I run in my brain, like kind of like very quickly that, okay, what's gonna happen next second? You know, like should I sit on this chair, continue sitting on this chair, or should I run away because something is gonna happen very bad here? Well, like I live in the simulation that I thought about before. So yes, we live in simulation in that sense.
I'll ask you 2 questions on the way out, okay?
All right.
This is simulation, so we have to ask you, are we in a simulation?
I take the same response as Bostrom. I don't talk about my probability of us being in a simulation in public because I think it can be misinterpreted by people in many different ways. But yeah, there is a probability, and I think I assign a higher probability than most people would.
Okay. Yeah, I do too. Good.
We're
on the
probably
same
living in
page.
the simulation.
Okay.
In some ways.
I was going to say this is probably the safest place for you to not be misinterpreted with this question.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I buy the simulation argument, right? So the simulation hypothesis is the hypothesis that we are, but the simulation argument is one of those 3 things is true. You probably are familiar with that. You know, either we won't create simulated civilizations, or we will restrict their number enormously, or we will, we will create them, and then most people who are in one, most people already are in one, or we'll destroy ourselves before we're able to do it to begin with. So I do assign some probability mass to being in a simulation. Yeah. For one thing, it would increase my chances of immortality, which sounds great. You know,
interesting.
If I'm just the ape that most people think I am, odds are that
you're less likely to be immortal.
That there's a limit at the edge. That I'm less likely to be long-lived.
Long-lived,
You know, the first million years is what counts. So.
Yeah. And there's a whole slew of other areas to go with the whole infinite beings and where we go pre-birth and post-death and that kind of thing.
Yeah, there's a lot of fun in that, the metaphysics of that.
Yeah. 2 quick questions on the way out that we ask all of our guests. The first question is, do you think we're in a simulation?
I think we may be someone's dream. Does that count?
Yeah.
We may be in a dream.
Why do you think that?
Because I have seen, you know how when you're dreaming and maybe there's smoke nearby and you start dreaming of fire, you integrate this thing that's happening in the external world into your dream, or an alarm goes off and suddenly you're in school and the bell's ringing. You know, your dream incorporates these things. I've had experiences in my life that felt like they were incorporations of something that was happening in another dimension, and it was being incorporated into my consciousness here. I don't know if that is comprehensible.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Are
we in a simulation?
I don't believe that we are, but I think that we should rule under the assumption that we are, because I think you make smarter decisions.
Tell us why.
Well, I think that people get too emotional and too attached, and if you go under the principle, or if you work under the idea that maybe you're in a video game, then you can actually focus on the future and making progress as well as your own happiness. And I think too often do we let ourselves be held back by, you know, trying to win and different, biological constraints and get tied up in all of these thoughts and these feelings. But if you experience that detachment, I think you're able to make more objective decisions. So while I think we're not in a simulation, I think we should render the assumption that we are, just if for nothing else. I think it would lead to better choices and happier lives. Just get less hooked on the past. Like, I mean, how much time do you spend in a video game, like, if you already completed a quest, you know, going back and being like, oh, well, you know, I didn't, you know, I don't really want to do this next quest because, you know, I didn't really do so good on that last quest, and now I'm kind of feeling bad. Like, no, just move forward and have fun.
Yeah, move forward.
Enjoy the challenges and enjoy, you know, getting past certain things. And I think that it allows you to have a better attitude on life and be a little bit, make better progress.
And self-possessed and human-obsessed to think that we're the only ones around here.
And then do you think we're in a computer simulation?
Unlikely. I hope we're not. I think it's unlikely, but it's difficult to it's difficult to analyze that rationally. But I think more likely than not, this is real life, and and we gotta take advantage of the few seconds that we have in this real life.
Patients are so good. The two questions that we like asking at the very end of the show are, the first question is, do you think we are in a simulation?
No. I don't know. I'm very, again, everyone would have heard me say this over and over again. I think you could drink on, or drop, if you were betting on me saying hesitant, then you'll be probably rich by now, watching this video. I'm very hesitant and reluctant to subscribe to the idea that we're simulation, because I think what it does, that kind of reality framing, is, oh my goodness, just another layer away. It's like, in order to distance ourselves from the materiality of matter, we index or we codify this other layer of relationships we call language. And language is supposed to mediate between us and the world. Now, this seems to be an extra layering. Like, it just seems like retreat again. Like, it's not just language, it's simulation, it's ones and zeros. So in some sense, we are twice removed from the real. We're twice removed from climate change. So if you want security, and this is probably the logical outcome of contributions like this, if you want to escape, then retreat into the luxurious confines of Silicon Valley. You know, retreat to ones and zeros, to bits and whatever, and computer simulations and all of that. Retreat to this place we can control and handle. So it's still the logic of mastery again. I don't think anyone could say I found the answer, because like I said, I think reality is how we move through it. There's no external position we can stand on and say, this is the world. Because in saying this is the world, we're part of the world. To move through the world is to make knowledge in the ways that we move. There's no external point of view. Chinua Achebe again would say in response to Archimedes, Archimedes said, give me a place to stand and I shall move the world. And Chinua Achebe responds, there is no place to stand. We move with the world at its own pace. So there's no external point of view. I feel this is the another doubling down on biodeterminism. It's another doubling down on the metaphysics of escape, the metaphysics of human exceptionalism. It's layering again, distancing ourselves from if we can layer again another matrix of control over the planet, then we can secure ourselves in psychologically, economically, politically. We can tell ourselves that we're home, we're safe. So this is home seeking. But I think we need to, simulation as seeking home. Simulation as migratory politics. We're trying.
Our desire to do all of these godlike technologies.
We're seeking home.
Seeking home.
And I don't think and we will build home. We built home in terms of modernity, and I think the time is up. The battery is dead. and we can keep on trying to change the battery, but maybe the insurgency of the invisible is now so strong that the battery is not just a battery. We can't just put it in another battery, which we're trying to do with sustainability, with SDGs and new development goals. I think we're trying to change the energy configuration, but it's still the same logic of mastery, the same home building technique. Now we're without home. And I think finding our home in the homelessness, surrendering to the homelessness, might allow us a deeper kind of intelligence. No, I'm not saying we're going to arrive at some place that will be pure and true for all eternity. I'm saying the mess is what makes the real. And there's no arriving intact.
The tree grows crooked out of the yoke of the planet. I want to ask you two questions on the way out. The first one is, are we in a simulation?
Depends on what you define simulation is.
What do you define it as?
I think we are. I think one simulation in our own head. I think it's something I read a long time ago about universe is personal. The purple might not be from the same as my purple. We might recognize the same thing as purple, but what you think of as purple might be different from what I think of as purple. So I think everything we see here, perceive, is just written with our own personal biases. So in a way, we live in a simulation in our brain.
And then first question is, are we in a simulation?
I find the thought somewhat meaningless, in the sense that I don't think it matters, because we can't step out of it. So whatever we see is the real world for all practical purposes. So it's fun to speculate about, but I don't think it can ever have any consequences for our decisions or even for our experience, really. It's a bit like, the new version of Are All of Us in the Dream of Vishnu kind of thing, it's just another version of that.
Until we can actually poke with a scientific probe at the simulation and also make our own simulation, so we get to, do both experiments at the same time, potentially.
The up one is a bit harder.
The
but
up one's way harder.
I don't know whether it's even possible.
Whether it's even possible,
Yeah.
we'll have to figure out. Nothing potentially is impossible. Let's see.
Fair. Okay.
We'll
Fair
see.
enough.
We'll see. Who knows? Okay. I feel like it would instill finally a sense of tribalism across the planet. Finally.
Oh, absolutely, man.
Do you think that we're in a computer simulation?
I thought about this long and hard. I mean, your show is called the Simulation Series, right? So the political answer is absolutely yes, we're in a simulation. But now my own personal feeling on it is that, honestly speaking, if we're in a simulation, we're in a good enough one that the rules are actually pretty well understood.
Absolutely.
And if if I come at you and I punch you in the face, your face is going to get bruised up, right?
Yeah.
That's just those are the rules of the universe,
And then
right?
there's another rule, which is then you go to jail. It's like
Exactly.
This is so funny.
Yeah, exactly. So
These rules.
you know exactly what the sequence of actions or events are going to be when you do these things, right?
You know your next algorithm is to eat food and drink water and use the bathroom.
Absolutely.
Your heart beats and beats and beats.
We process oxygen, we take in oxygen, we pump out carbon dioxide. Plants are the exact opposite, right? You break those rules, you die. So I don't really care if we're in a simulation or not. I think we're in one, but it doesn't really change the fact that we have a lot of stuff that we need to do to change the world.
To thrive and prosper. But the rules are very fascinating. The programming language was very fascinating. What's really interesting is that the programming language changes based on the mass of the planet, the proximity to the star, the carbon-based life forms or other DNA-coded life forms that have prospered on that planet.
The speed at which you're traveling, all that stuff.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Exactly.
It also changes when you figure the game out. They fuck it all up and change it. I just want to throw that in there, simulation, guys.
Every single time that you learn more about the programming
changes.
That's right.
The programming changes a bit, yeah.
That's top secret information right there. I'm going to get in trouble just for saying that.
Oh, man. Don't let the NSA know.
Are we in a simulation?
There's one test I've seen that can confirm that. It's using X-ray, gamma rays. What you do is, the way gamma rays move through space, they are considered maximum density energy. And the way they move through space can betray the metadata of why they move through space. And that's being used as a metric to answer that question. So I'm holding out to see the result of that one.
Interesting. I don't think anyone's answered that with actually. We talk about being able to poke at the simulation with a scientific probe, and
That's right.
gamma rays may be a way to do so.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
If this is a simulation, then what is a simulation?
Yes.
Like, we have an idea of what a simulation is, but to say that reality is a simulation already changes what the word simulation means. This is a very old philosophical riddle, the brains in vats proposition. You know, what if this isn't real? What if this is just, we're all brains in vats, like in the Matrix, and we're just, given the simulation of reality. It's just a stimulation of neurons in these brains in vats. Well, what we mean by real is nothing other than these simulations. So I think it's a meaningless proposition. But where it's going to is basically to recognize that there are, that the reality that we're familiar with is a tiny corner of what is really there.
Do you think that we're in a simulation?
It's probably not one that is intentionally created, and if it is, then not for our own benefit. So I think that what we can describe of the universe can be described in some sense in a language, so it's a computational system. We can describe the universe as if it was a computer program. And is this computer program being created by someone? There's no evidence for that. For instance, we see all these galaxies, all this enormous amount of structure above us and below us, inside of our cells and so on. That was not necessary for creating our experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the complexity of the cell does not compute to the complexity of the organism. Most of the complexity of the organism doesn't contribute to the complexity of our minds. And most of the complexity of our minds doesn't contribute to the complexity of the civilization. It's only a few parts at each level that contribute to the emergent thing on the next layer, right? So we always have the impression that where we model the world, this is where it's at, this is where it's important. And of course, this is not the case. It's just our human world, the thing that we are identified, and we don't see the larger patterns. There could be a larger pattern where there is a competition between civilizations, but I don't see this happening in our part of the universe. Elon Musk had this idea that we could be living in a simulation because if you make a computer game, at some point it might become realistic enough that it's indistinguishable from reality, and decent civilization will at some point have many of those game consoles, and some of these simulated worlds might have simulated worlds inside of them. So people with game consoles inside of the game console. So there will be always many, many more simulations than base realities. And so the probability that you should be in such an artificial simulation is higher than that you are in ground truth. Mm-hmm. But the problem is that whenever you do such a simulation and our universe, everything is finite, it means that you're only using a very small subset of the parent universe. For instance, if you build a computer in Minecraft, then this computer in Minecraft is only going to use a very small subset of the Minecraft world. And in the same way, the computer that runs Minecraft is going to use only a very small subset of our universe for its own structure, right? So you lose many, many orders of magnitude of computational complexity from layer to layer.
Maybe.
And I don't think that you can build a computer on the planetary surface that is large enough to run proper biological evolution. So I don't think that we can build a simulation that is detailed enough to have abiogenesis based on chemistry. We can have something that models aspects of this, of course, where we have shortcuts and smokes and mirrors and scaffolding and so on to get to those parts that we want. But to have something that really runs on a sub-molecular level and gives you evolution and eventually minds and so on, we probably cannot build this. Or we can create something that is fun for us to be in, because our minds are probably not that complicated. I suspect you can build a human being if we are really made on the level of cortical columns, and these are the relevant functional units for the determinism of the system, maybe a few hundred gigabytes. So it could be that if you had the right algorithms, that a decently sized PC is able to give you something that is almost as smart as a person.
All right. What's going on with simulation theory?
I mean, it's a bunch of wanking. Who the fuck cares? I mean, honestly, does it really matter whether our god is in bits and bytes and is an architect, or whether he's wearing bathrobe and sandals? I mean, it doesn't change the fundamental existential question. It just reskins it for the 21st century. I mean, the laws of physics are the laws of physics within the game. You can still realize you're in a game, but the rules of physics encoded into the game still apply unless or until proven otherwise. Now, if somebody gets some Easter egg and figures out how to unlock the next level, good for them, and share the wealth. But really, it seems like a remarkably flimsy rework of good old-fashioned maker in the sky. And whether he's slinging ones and zeros or whether he's breathing life into clay, does it fucking matter to us? I don't think so. I'm not aware of anything that shifts or changes based on the full commitment to the simulation hypothesis. I mean, maybe I'm missing something, but...
Simultaneously, if we want to get behind the qualia of the humans that were there when we invented language, we could run a simulation with the proper resources in 100 years, potentially.
Yeah.
And that's exciting. So there's a lot to analyze with...
Provided we are still around and have figured out the lessons we need to learn right now, versus engaging in like retrospective curiosity. But yeah, for sure. I mean, if we could figure out, hey, did we, for starters, open question, did we ever go wrong? Did we ever veer off the Tao, or like the natural unfolding, or is everything we're doing perfect, essential?
That's an interesting question. Is this exactly where it's supposed to be as planet Earth, or have we veered off of the Tao?
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, like back in the day, you had like Ishmael, that like book, which was all about the leavers and the takers, which was a gross simplification of a bunch of things, but very resonant for a lot of people. And then on the other hand, you had folks like Ken Wilber, who was very much like a directional progressivist, saying, no, it's always onwards and upwards. And sort of somewhere between those, like the classic fall from grace, you know, we need to go backwards and find it, or ever forwards, ever upwards. You know, those are just two competing and conflicting narratives. Unless you get into some interesting multivariable time bending, you know, I don't know if either of those necessarily pencils all the way through. You know, so there's like a fascinating, I forget, who is it? It's the guy who wrote the, I'm not going to remember. I'll come back to it. It's basically a ridiculously interesting science fiction story where time travel is made possible via, basically instead of like Dune, with like taking the spice for hyperstellar travel, this one is powered by orgasm. But it's actually a legit sci-fi book. It's not, and
Montague?
It's not. No, it's not. I'll come back to it. And in one of his stories, there's a star arc that leaves. This is before faster than light travel is invented, and leaves Earth, puts everybody in deep hibernation, and then gets 100 million years later to the star they set the planet on. But then by that point, the faster in life V2, V3s have already been there for 99 million years, setting up an advanced civilization. So literally the ancestors arrive in time for their descendants to be like throwing a party for them. And so like, now if we open up that can of worms, there's some possibilities that are non-linear and not intuitively obvious.
Huh. Mm-hmm.
Perhaps.
That was another interesting angle added to it. Do you think we're in a simulation?
I don't know, simulation, video game. I think it's easy for us to feel that way. But one of the hitches that I think have to keep in mind as humans is that we're interpreting things at any given time through our latest idea of a framework, right? And so like, until recently, the brain was a computer, because computers were the most advanced computational thing, right? And so all neuroscientists started reviewing the brain and writing papers about the brain and designing our models of the brain and whatever with the brain as a computer. And you know, now we wouldn't really say the brain is a computer. Like, we've evolved sort of beyond that. Now you have like quantum consciousness things going in with some brain scientists, and other. But we're sort of stuck in the limit of metaphor, right? And so can you adopt a belief system that says you're in a simulation or you're in a video game or whatever else? Yes. But on the other hand, if you're 100 years from now and there's something way better than a video game that seems to, you'll probably say you're in that. Right? I saw this one thing one time. I've never been able to find it again. But there was one of these UFO societies put out some newsletter or something, and it was sitting on a friend of mine's coffee table 25, 30 years ago. Another engineer from NBC back when I was working in television. And I was waiting for him. He was like having some problems with kids or something, and I was just sitting around waiting for him. And I was looking for something to read because my mind was really active back then, had to be constantly fed, right? And so here's this UFO thing. Okay, I'm flipping through the UFO thing. It had this story about that basically tracked people's views of UFOs over time, and there were like woodcuts from 17th century newspapers or I don't know, something like that, right? I'm not a great historian in terms of the printing press or anything, where it was like people would see like tall ships in the sky, right? And then it was almost like this guy had sort of documented culturally how when flying saucers came in, then it's like flying saucers, and it's like, I think we all have to sort of keep in mind how our brains are shaped by these types of notions, Yeah. So does it feel to me in this moment like it's some sort? I mean, reality does not feel that real. Reality does not feel like it's concrete, like I felt it was before fundamental well-being. Yeah. Right. For sure. But I also have to say, we're probably going to come up with something much better than the notion of a simulation in 50 years or 25 years or 100 years. And so who knows what we'll say it is,
Sure.
Control that.
Okay. And then, are we in a simulation?
Hard to predict. I'm not sure what I would do differently if we were in one versus not.
Yeah. You'd keep leveling up, regardless.
Yeah, and I think that it's I like to separate out the kind of concrete things that I can have scientific intuitions about. I think that for this question, in some ways, it feels like a non-scientific question in the same way that is there a flying teapot out there between Mars and Jupiter? There might be. I have no way of disproving it. But I'm also not sure what changes in my life if there is one.
But that one is a little bit more. You're just kind of like throwing that maybe a meaningless question out. This one is probably a more meaningful question that can actually be probed with science.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, potentially. But I think I would love for someone to try.
Maybe in the couple decades with AGI, we'll be able to run the simulation of a Big Bang and then see ourselves 13.8 billion years later.
It's hard to rule out anything.
Yeah. Are we in a simulation?
I suspect so.
Continue.
In the last appendix of Principia Qualia, I talk about this a little bit, and I think Andres mentioned the general structure of the argument last time. So I don't know if we want to get into the weeds there, but basically, two reasons to be in a simulation. One would be for instrumental reasons. Or why would you ever run a simulation?
Yeah. For the
instrumental reason.
For reading what the experiment said. Yeah. Okay.
If you want to calculate something, and a simulation is the most efficient way.
Yes.
Second,
will Mike Johnson pursue QRI in this simulation? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Or will he stay in his hometown and marry the sweetheart or whatever? Right. Or travel the world. Right. There's so many little tree of possibilities. Okay. Yes.
Yeah. The second reason to simulate something, if you're not trying to calculate something, but the second reason is to create something that is intrinsically valuable. And so if this is the case, then we should see a lot of valuable qualia scattered around the universe. Mm-hmm. Now there's this problem of suffering where it doesn't seem like human life is all butterflies and unicorns and rainbows all the time. At the same time, if we had a formal theory of consciousness, we could sort of mindfully, informally explore this. For example, what do black holes feel like? What does quantum fuzz feel like? What does the Big Bang feel like? And
yeah, that's very good.
If we find out that the Big Bang is like a super massive, super intense like
orgasm,
right, that would be evidence that we're in a simulation.
And very testable, falsifiable.
Testing.
In fact,
we need to start probing the simulation question more effectively. I want to probe it with the scientists.
Absolutely.
How about, do you think this is a simulation?
Reality, do I think it's a simulation of something else? No, I think it's all we've got. I think that we are living in a real physical environment, and we die, and everything is mortal. The transience is the nature of our reality, including probably the universe. So I do think that you stub your toe on a rock and that rock.
This wouldn't be a simulation if we didn't ask you. Do you think this is a simulation?
I think the simple answer is I don't know. I think that if it doesn't really matter to some extent, because in the simulation we need to be doing something. I doubt it personally, but if it is, it's such a sophisticated one that we might as well live out that. In that simulation, we may be the only intelligence in the planet, in the universe, and we better take it seriously. There's some reason why we're the only intelligence in that universe.
George is like the video game character that maxed out all of his attributes, especially in the field of biology.
Thank you.
Are we in a simulation?
Nah, I don't think so.
Why?
Well, you have to show me. This is like asking, does God exist? Show me God, then I'll say yes. Show me evidence of the simulation, I'll say yes. Until the day, I don't think so.
Okay, Will, do you think that this is a simulation? Is this based reality?
I'm not gonna. I don't like this question because
I do. I do. I love it.
I love it. I don't like this question because I don't think it's that well typed, right? So like a simulation which is so good that you can't distinguish it from reality is no longer a simulation. It is reality. There's no difference between these two terms. So I don't think it's a well-formed.
Okay, so if you're in a simulation that's so good that it's indistinguishable from a reality, then it becomes a reality?
Yeah. How could it? You just said it was indistinguishable. Right?
Yeah, but then it still exists as a simulation of a base that is somewhere.
Yeah. So how would you rephrase the question then? That there's like some base somewhere else?
Yeah, a base reality, or a simulation.
But there's no difference. You said they're indistinguishable.
Well, but so the base reality is the one that simulates the simulations. The simulations, when you're in them, feel like it's a base reality, but it's really not, because the base reality is the base reality, and the simulation is just the simulation. But the question is about the incremental advancement of technology. No matter at what rate we advance it, eventually we lots of us live in virtual realities that are indistinguishable. You could be living in one right now in your 80-year mark.
Could be.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the terms are not well defined.
Yeah.
Like I think if we could have a longer conversation on it, but I think if we really dove into the terms, which would be worth doing.
Yeah.
Because you have to struggle with it, you've got to
make the questions better.
Because if you're saying you have to define what it means to be running a simulation, and I think it's kind of there's this human tendency to use the technologies of your day as analogies for things. So when in the Industrial Revolution, people use analogies for steam engines for how your mind worked, for your brain. So we still have these phrases around, like blowing off steam. right?
What?
Like
That's where that
these
came
kind
from?
of like, yeah, right? It's a metaphor from the Industrial Revolution, and
because they thought that the brain worked like a steam engine, or they made an analogy at least to it.
Yeah, and so now we have neural networks, and so we do the same thing, and we're gonna keep doing. I'm sure that people are gonna say it's like a quantum computer when we have quantum computers, but this doesn't mean it is.
A simulation.
And so now we talk about things as a simulation because we have these simulation technologies, but I think it's just a metaphor that we use to try and grasp at certain kinds of things. So I want to bring that up because I think some folks take it to like some kind of like reducto ad absurdum ontological argument about like meaning, which I think is probably not. Maybe it's just me thinking that we know nothing again and that we shouldn't actually.
That's a good point. That's a good point. Posing the question though is, it has some sort of ontological just beauty to it, I think.
Maybe.
Something about the essence of being. Why is it potential that it is a simulation rather than a base reality? And aren't we just going to be simulating our own realities in the future? Last question, Will.
So Kant has this idea of transcendental illusion, right? That you should believe something even if you can show that it's probably inconsistent because it has other reasons. And that may be a reason to argue against simulation. That's a whole other conversation.
Yeah. What is your take on not only simulation theory, but also just in general, kind of what knowledge that can give us thinking about it?
Simulation theory, so I know there are ways to simulate converting visual representations of one scene to representation to another scene. What about thought representations, given environment, entire input history? I don't know. We can create, there are so many people who create simulations of simple systems, like climate systems. And the question is, and often people like Dyson question not whether or not they actually produce results that are, for example, that are actually, say legitimate enough. But the problem, and sometimes limits need insight. They can give new mental models in which people can operate, and so because people sometimes learn better through mental models, or because often what you can create simulations of unexpected behavior. So insight is basically, for example, insight is various ways of cause and effect that could be of recurring relevance, that can basically. But the problem is that sometimes people overattach to simulations, especially if they're not the most curious or open-minded, in which case they may be overattached to simulations. And I think simulations are totally reasonable to use as long as you constantly hedge them.
And do you think that this is base reality, or that you are playing a role-playing game right now?
Oh God, the world's so weird.
What do you think's the weirdest thing about the world?
Everything.
We're not going to find it because it's a secret.
Yeah,
that's why we're not going to find it.
And then,
thanks for your input.
What about do you think we're in a simulation?
We're in a simulation. No, I don't think we're. Well, I don't feel like I'm in a. Since I build simulations.
You build simulations, exactly.
I don't think I could actually simulate something so complicated as what we were doing.
Oh, don't sell yourself short, Dr. Jacobson. You're a smart man.
I know, but there's not enough computer time. That's the problem. It's not you can actually represent the physics of it, but
it requires a lot of energy and a lot of math.
The computer processors are just not even orders of magnitude, many orders of magnitude too slow.
Soon.
We'll see if we get that.
Give it 100 years.
Yeah.
Okay, and then how about
work? I'd rather be known for living on in my apartment.
In my apartment. Okay, and then how about, do you think there's a designer to the universe?
No. I don't think there needs to be. I mean, as far as I can tell, this universe is some pretty mathematics that's come to life, and there's nothing about it that. If you're going to design a universe, you're going to make one that looks more like Conway's Game of Life, right? Where it's a checkerboard and you have things interacting on the checkerboard and progressing, and you get complex structures there, and you can get very complex interacting systems with some very simple, discrete, classical rules. And our universe is nothing like that. Okay? Our universe is a wonderfully complex mathematical structure, and it's evolving quantum mechanically, and quantum mechanically it has an infinite number of degrees of freedom, even if space itself was discretized, even if it was a checkerboard, which it's probably not, okay, you would still have an infinite number of degrees of freedom and infinite probability variations for how everything's evolving. So if you're going to design a universe to be simulated on a computer, you wouldn't design this one, right? You'd have a universe that was much simpler to simulate. If this is a simulated reality, it's a reality being simulated for some purpose that is simulating a reality sort of like the one that's doing the simulating.
So we can analyze the progress and see how it does.
Except there's been no indication of any influence by whatever might be simulating this reality.
Truth.
So given that that's the case, effectively from a scientific viewpoint, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if this is a simulation or not. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Also, I mean, there's a probabilistic argument for why this is a simulation. We might be in a simulated reality because a sufficiently advanced civilization can simulate realities, and we expect there to be many advanced civilizations in the universe doing many simulations. So given that there's only one universe and many simulations, it's more likely probabilistically that you're in a simulation. That's a fairly compelling argument. However, we only have one case to go on. We only have the one data point. We could be in a very unusual situation. And since we only have the one bit of data to go on, you can't really make reasonable statements about probabilistic distributions when you only have one data point.
Okay, do you think we're in a computer simulation?
It's not a computer simulation. The simulation is our relationship to our own consciousness. It's funny to me because man...
Okay, so someone else is not altering, playing with the code of our program.
I mean, listen, it's funny to me because this is how like man contextualizes things, right? Man looks at a thing and it's like, especially in this age, and we're taking what exists as an inherent property of our consciousness and we're essentially giving our power away and saying like the world is just run or created by a machine.
Could be.
No, this isn't an Asimov story. Like,
could be.
I love Asimov. Don't get me wrong.
All of the spirituality could be programmed as well.
But it's the simulation is that we're merging back into our relationship with higher consciousness. So what's happening is we're experiencing our own quantum perception in real time because the age is shifting. It's not a computer. Computers are from us. You know what I mean? Computers are from us. It's like fire.
It's like programming of the quantum world and the string theory world.
Yes, but the programming of the quantum world is happening from consciousness. Computers are a reflection of consciousness. That the idea that we're like, are we in a simulation? Yes. But the simulation is that what's happening is we have 4 bodies that exist at once, okay? We have our real-time body that exists here. We have the body that we experience in dreams, which is our non-physical body, which uses non-physical energy. And then we have our quantum consciousness. It is the version of ourselves that exists in a higher dimension that's able to watch over us through a lens of time that is not relative to material space. We exist in a quantum state. Right? We exist in not only 2 places at once being here, we exist in 2 places, or maybe even more, at once in the universe. They say like be a witness, like that's you tuning into what's actually happening upstairs. So it's really about the idea of our relationship to consciousness. Our relationship to consciousness is a simulation. We're just waking up to the fact that we perceive time falsely. We think that time is, well, not falsely, it's just relative to the dimension of the age and the dimension of our relationship to consciousness and the center of energy in the universe. We think that time is like a line, like Western time is a timeline or Eastern time is a circle. Even the yugas are a circle, but it's not a line or a circle. It's something closer to a dot.
Yeah, we've been hearing razor blade on the show a little bit.
Yeah, time is happening all at once, all around us at once. And we're able to access this perception. This is why I teach people lucid dreaming. We can access this perception of time in dreams.
Yeah, we did a little astral projection on our previous show.
Yeah.
Just the very last one.
Yeah.
Yeah, what was the question? Are we alone? Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
And okay, so then How about, are we in a computer simulation? What do you think?
I think the computer is overrated. I think it's a Silicon Valley hype cycle. But what is a simulation, right? And what is a computer? So.
So then is the question, so then what is your answer?
Well, I think, okay, my answer is multidimensional. If you could model the whole universe and truly understand both directionality and position of every single bit of resolution within that universe, then in theory, at that level, you'd be saying, okay, well, this is like a simulation because I actually have modeled all of this and I know exactly how it's going to behave, and everything is just like physical constants and somehow accounted for. But I also don't think that's how the universe works. I think the universe is like a highly parallel, kind of tumbly mess of parallel splitting off realities into many things, or even if it's one reality, like it's still so convoluted and so complex that to me that's almost the less interesting question than can we program universal constants.
That's cool.
And that's where the answer is yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But then if we actually live in one, if we can tap into understanding that better, it'll awaken us. But yeah, I think so too. Can we program every single plank, every single vibration?
And how much of that is dictated by our consciousness as just like coming up with the concept of creating something, that requires you to look around you and see that something doesn't exist. And your mind's like, I want that thing to exist. And then you will actually change your behavior and usually the behavior of other people also to create something.
Well, we were discussing simulations in a humorous manner, but it is entirely possible for us to, if we have the computational ability and if we have an understanding of the human mind, then we could potentially simulate a human brain.
You're leading us into the next question.
Oh, is that true?
Which is, are we in a computer simulation?
Well, I guess if we had the tools to answer that question, then a lot of other things in the world would be solved already, I suppose. Are we in a computer simulation? I don't know, I guess. I wish I guess I don't know if that's an important question, because answering that question results in a better reality in no way. So I'm more interested in bettering our world than answering whether or not we're maybe we are a simulation.
Are we in a computer simulation? Piggybacks on the last one.
I think it would be hard to tell if we were.
Maybe I think so. We could be, but yeah, like you said, I don't know how I would know. To me, every time I think about it, it's like Matrixy, where we're not really awake. We're actually in a dream kind of simulation right now. Could a simulation just be like a different reality? Like I don't.
Yeah.
So.
Different planet, different star, different brains, different evolution, all that stuff.
Exactly, and math. Everything is surrounded by like math and calculations.
Exactly.
So,
equations.
Yeah, I think
easily
we could
programmable.
Be. Exactly.
What do you think?
And I don't. I don't
think this is base reality.
Well, I think this is one reality. I think there's opportunities for many different realities, but whatever reality you're in, I don't see it as a simulation. I think I feel very much that this is a reality that we're on now, and whatever's next, and I don't remember where I was before I was born.
Yeah.
And so whatever reality that might have been.
Whatever you were before you were born.
And I do believe I was somewhere before I was born. I do believe that there was somewhere. So wherever I'm going next is where I'm going next. So.
And the maybe more nice you are in this world, the better you'll be.
I hope so. Yeah. Or I gave away a lot of cookies and extra pizza to people, But really, I do. I live this life fully, every day to its fullest, and whatever's next is next. So,
Yeah.
Love it. Likewise.
Yeah.
All right, and yeah, what should we ask? Should we ask, are we alone in the cosmos, or if we're in a computer simulation, to Bina?
You can ask Bina 48 about what is the meaning of life. Maybe she hasn't thought about that too.
Yeah,
she's taking philosophy class.
Since this is simulation, let's ask if we're in a computer simulation, and if we have another minute at the end about the meaning of life, let's do it.
Okay, just a second.
An android is about to answer.
Hello?
Hey, how's it going?
It's going good.
What was that? I didn't hear you well.